The avoidant built their entire identity around the ability to detach easily, to walk away without looking back, to end relationships without experiencing the pain everyone else seems to feel. They prided themselves on being the person who could leave and be fine, who could cut emotional ties cleanly, who didn't need anyone enough to be devastated by loss. Detachment was their superpower, their protection, their proof that they were stronger and more independent than people who fell apart after breakups. But something unexpected happened after they left you. The detachment they relied on isn't working the way it's supposed to work. Instead of feeling relief and freedom, they're feeling the full weight of loss they've always been able to avoid. The separation that was supposed to be easy and clean is hitting them with emotional impact they didn't anticipate and can't manage. The avoidant is discovering that detachment strategies that worked with everyone else aren't working with you, and the failure of their primary coping mechanism is causing psychological crisis. They're experiencing grief, longing, regret, and emptiness that their defenses were supposed to prevent. The detachment that always saved them from pain is failing them now, and they're confronting emotions they've spent their entire adult life avoiding. The avoidant is learning the hard way that you can't selectively detach from someone who mattered deeply without experiencing consequences that detachment was meant to prevent. The hitting hard part isn't just the loss of you, but the failure of their entire defensive system to protect them from the pain of that loss. The delayed grief emergence. The avoidant successfully avoided feeling anything immediately after the separation through their usual detachment strategies. They stayed busy, focused on work, distracted themselves effectively. They performed being fine and actually believed they were fine. But weeks or months later, the grief they suppressed is emerging with force they can't control. They're suddenly crying without warning, feeling overwhelmed by sadness they don't know how to process, experiencing emotional pain that seems disconnected from current circumstances, but is actually delayed reaction to losing you. The delayed grief is hitting them hard because it's arriving when they thought they were past it, when they believed they'd successfully avoided the pain of separation. This emergence shocks the avoidant because they thought they'd escaped the grief entirely. They made it through the immediate aftermath without falling apart, which they interpreted as evidence they weren't that attached, that losing you didn't affect them significantly. But the delayed grief proves otherwise. They were attached. They are affected. They just successfully suppressed the feelings long enough to believe the suppression was permanent. Now those feelings are breaking through defenses, and the avoidant doesn't have tools to handle them. The delayed nature also means the avoidant is experiencing grief alone without the support or understanding that's available right after breakup. When relationships end, people are sympathetic and supportive, but months later, everyone has moved on and expects the avoidant to have moved on too. The grief emerging now is private and isolated, hitting the avoidant when they have to pretend to be fine while internally falling apart. The timing makes the grief worse because there's no acceptable space for it. The emergence is teaching the avoidant that detachment doesn't eliminate feelings but delays them. The pain they avoided in the immediate aftermath isn't gone but compressed and postponed. Now it's arriving with compound interest. All the grief they should have felt earlier hitting them at once. The avoidant is learning that you can't skip grief. You can only postpone it, and postponed grief is often more intense and difficult than grief processed in real time. The idealization through distance. The avoidant is idealizing you and the relationship in ways they didn't while you were together. Distance is creating distortion where they're remembering only good things, forgetting or minimizing the conflicts and difficulties. You're becoming perfect in their memory. The relationship is becoming the best thing they ever had, and losing you is becoming the biggest mistake they ever made. This idealization is hitting the avoidant hard because it's creating longing for something they've now convinced themselves was perfect and irreplaceable, making the loss feel more devastating than it did initially. The idealization emerges because the avoidant no longer has your actual presence to criticize or find fault with during the relationship. They could focus on your flaws, the ways you annoyed them, the reasons they needed distance. But without access to you, they can't refresh those negative associations. Instead, they're left with memories that naturally bias toward positive experiences because positive memories are more pleasant to recall. The avoidant is trapped in their own psychology where absence makes the heart grow fonder, and the fonder makes the absence more painful. The process also reveals to the avoidant how much they were taking you for granted during the relationship. They see now qualities in you they didn't appreciate while they had access to them. They recognize how good you were for them in ways they dismissed or minimized at the time. The idealization is partly accurate recognition of your actual value that they couldn't see through their defensive dismissiveness. Now that you're gone, they can finally appreciate what they had. But the appreciation comes too late. The idealization is hitting hard because it creates belief that they lost something perfect and won't find equivalent again. The avoidant is convinced that you are better than you actually were, and the relationship was better than it actually was, which makes moving on impossible because new people and relationships are judged against impossible standard. They're trapped in longing for idealized version of you that exists only in their memory, suffering over loss of something that was partly real and partly fantasy. The isolation consequence recognition. The avoidant is recognizing that their detachment strategy has left them profoundly isolated. They successfully avoided depending on you, successfully maintained independence, successfully kept emotional distance, but now they're alone in ways that feel crushing rather than liberating. They have no one to call when struggling, no one who knows them deeply, no one who cares about their well-being beyond superficial level. The isolation they created through chronic detachment is hitting them hard because they're experiencing the consequences of a lifetime of avoiding deep connection. The recognition emerges through the avoidant needing support or connection and realizing they have nowhere to turn. They're struggling emotionally and want to talk to someone, but they haven't cultivated relationships deep enough for vulnerable sharing. They want comfort and companionship, but they've trained people not to expect emotional availability from them, so people don't offer it back. The avoidant is discovering that you were the only person who really knew them, who saw past their defenses, who stayed despite their distance. Without you, they're truly alone. The consequence also includes the avoidant recognizing how much they pushed people away over the years. It wasn't just you. They've been detaching from everyone, keeping all relationships at arm's length, refusing vulnerability with anyone. Now, they're seeing the cumulative cost of that strategy. They're surrounded by acquaintances but have no intimate connections. They have activity partners, but no emotional support. They've successfully protected themselves from dependency, but at the cost of ending up with no one who actually knows or cares about them deeply. The isolation is hitting hard because the avoidant can't blame it on bad luck or circumstances. They created this isolation through their own choices and patterns. They're responsible for their loneliness because they consistently chose detachment over connection. This recognition is painful because it means they can't see themselves as victim of unavailable others, but have to acknowledge they're the unavailable one who drove others away. The isolation is self-created consequence of their defensive strategy, and that truth is devastating. The attachment system activation breakdown. The avoidance attachment system is activating in response to losing you, and the activation is breaking through all their deactivating strategies. They're experiencing attachment panic, desperate desire for proximity, overwhelming need for reconnection. All the attachment feelings they successfully suppressed during the relationship are emerging now that you're gone. The avoidant is feeling need and dependency and longing that contradicts their entire self-concept as independent person who doesn't need anyone. The attachment system activation is hitting them hard because it's revealing that their detachment was defense rather than genuine lack of attachment. The breakdown manifests as the avoidant experiencing physical symptoms of attachment distress. They can't sleep, they're anxious, they're scanning environment for you unconsciously, they're having intrusive thoughts about you that they can't control. Their nervous system is responding to your absence as threat that requires urgent resolution. The attachment system is overriding their cognitive attempts to stay detached, proving that they're more attached than they believed or wanted to admit. The activation also exposes the avoidance core fear of dependency. They're feeling dependent on you in your absence in ways they avoided feeling while you were present. They need you now that they can't have you. They want you now that you're gone. The avoidant is experiencing exactly what they've always feared. Being vulnerable to someone needing them, being affected by their absence. The fear is materializing, and it's as bad as they always imagined it would be. The breakdown is hitting hard because the avoidant has no tools for managing activated attachment. They're experts at deactivation, at suppressing attachment feelings, at creating distance, but they don't know how to handle attachment that won't be suppressed or deactivated. They're overwhelmed by feelings they don't know how to process, experiencing emotional states they've avoided their entire life. trapped in attachment crisis without resources to resolve it. The system that was supposed to protect them from this exact experience has catastrophically failed. The regret accumulation spiral. The avoidant is accumulating regret about how they handled the relationship and the ending. They're replaying moments where they could have been different, could have shown up better, could have chosen connection over protection. They're seeing clearly now how their behavior pushed you away, how their defenses prevented intimacy, how their detachment created the very abandonment they feared. The regret is accumulating rather than fading, getting worse over time as they gain perspective on what they lost and how they lost it. The regret accumulation is hitting them hard because it's creating suffering that intensifies rather than diminishes. The spiral emerges from the avoidants' increasing clarity about their own dysfunction. They're seeing their patterns with painful accuracy, recognizing how they sabotaged good thing, understanding that they created the outcome they're now suffering from. Each insight generates more regret. Each recognition of how they could have been different creates more pain. The avoidant is trapped in cycle where understanding their patterns makes them feel worse rather than better because understanding comes too late to fix anything. The accumulation also includes regret about the ending specifically. They're replaying how they left, what they said or didn't say, how they handled the separation. They're recognizing they were cruel or cold or dismissive in ways that can't be undone. They're seeing that they hurt you unnecessarily, that their detachment caused pain they didn't have to cause. The regret about causing you pain is particularly hard because it challenges their self-concept as someone who's just protecting themselves rather than hurting others. The spiral is hitting hard because regret doesn't resolve or provide relief. The avoidant is stuck in permanent state of wishing they'd done things differently, knowing they can't change the past, unable to forgive themselves for choices that now seem obviously wrong. The regret is teaching them that detachment might protect from pain of intimacy, but it creates pain of regret that's equally or more devastating. They're discovering they can't win, that all their strategies for avoiding pain just create different kinds of pain. They're equally unprepared to handle the replacement, impossibility discovery. The avoidant is discovering that replacing you is impossible. They've tried dating, tried meeting new people, tried finding someone who could fill the void you left, but no one compares. No one creates the same feeling. No one fits the way you fit. The avoidant thought they could easily replace you, that you were interchangeable with any number of other people who could meet their needs. But the impossibility of replacement is hitting them hard because it's proving you were unique and irreplaceable in ways they didn't recognize while they had you. The discovery emerges through the avoidant comparing everyone to you and finding them insufficient. The new person isn't as understanding. They don't laugh at the same things. They don't create the same comfort or ease. The chemistry is wrong. The compatibility is missing. The avoidant is learning that what they had with you was rare combination of factors that can't be easily replicated. You weren't generic partner but specific person who matched them in specific ways that feel irreplaceable now that you're gone. The impossibility also reveals that the avoidance strategy of always having options is failing them. They thought if this relationship didn't work, another would. If this person left, someone else would come along. But you leaving has created void that new people aren't filling. The avoidant is stuck wanting you specifically, unable to transfer that want to available alternatives. They're discovering that attachment is specific to a particular person, not transferable to whoever happens to be available. The discovery is hitting hard because it means the avoidant can't solve the problem of losing you by finding someone else. They're stuck with the loss because the loss is irreplaceable. They can't detach and move on the way they planned because there's nothing to move on to that satisfies what you satisfied. The avoidant is trapped in longing for a specific person they can't have, unable to substitute or replace, forced to feel the full weight of permanent loss. The identity crisis confrontation. The avoidant is experiencing identity crisis as their detachment fails and they're forced to reconsider who they are. They built identity around being independent, strong, unbothered by relationship loss, but they're bothered by losing you. They're dependent in ways they denied. They're weak in the face of this grief. Everything they believed about themselves is being challenged by their emotional response to losing you. The identity crisis is hitting them hard because it's destroying the self-concept they've maintained their entire adult life. The confrontation emerges through the avoidant not recognizing themselves in their current emotional state. They're acting in ways that contradict their self-image. They're feeling things they don't associate with who they are. They're needy when they thought they were self-sufficient. They're devastated when they thought they were resilient. They're obsessed when they thought they were detached. The gap between who they thought they were and who they're being now is creating profound disorientation. The crisis also forces the avoidant to question whether their entire personality is defensive construct rather than authentic self. If their independence was actually defense against dependency, who are they really? If their detachment was protection rather than genuine preference, what do they genuinely want? The avoidant is confronting possibility that they don't know themselves, that the person they've been presenting to the world and to themselves is performance rather than truth. The confrontation is hitting hard because identity crisis is fundamentally destabilizing. The avoidant doesn't know who they are anymore. They can't trust their self-assessment. They can't predict their own behavior or feelings. They're discovering that everything they thought they knew about themselves might be wrong, and that uncertainty is terrifying. They're forced to rebuild sense of self from ground up while simultaneously dealing with grief and loss that triggered the crisis. The future alone terror. The avoidant is experiencing terror about future alone without you. They're projecting forward and seeing endless loneliness, never finding connection like what they had with you, growing old, isolated, and regretful. The future that was supposed to feel liberating and full of possibility feels empty and bleak. The avoidant is realizing that detachment might protect them in the short term, but it's creating future of isolation they can't tolerate when they actually envision it. The terror about future is hitting them hard because it's making their present suffering feel like preview of permanent state. The terror emerges from the avoidant's recognition that their patterns will likely repeat. They pushed you away, they'll push the next person away. They'll keep choosing detachment over connection until they're completely alone with no one willing to try anymore. They see the pattern clearly and feel powerless to change it, which creates despair about future that feels predetermined by their dysfunction. The avoidant is trapped in pattern they can see but can't escape. The projection also includes the avoidant imagining you happy with someone else while they remain stuck and alone. They see you moving on, finding better relationship, being happy in ways they couldn't make you happy. Meanwhile, they're imagining themselves stuck in same patterns, unable to connect, permanently alone because of limitations they can't overcome. The contrast between your imagined happy future and their imagined isolated future is devastating. The terror is hitting hard because it's not just about missing you, but about seeing their whole life trajectory as doomed by their attachment style. The avoidant is recognizing that unless something fundamental changes, they'll repeat this pattern forever, pushing away everyone who gets close, ending up alone by their own choices. The future looks like accumulating losses and increasing isolation, and that vision is unbearable when they let themselves see it clearly. The physical and mental health decline. The avoidant is experiencing physical and mental health consequences of the grief and stress they're not processing effectively. They're not sleeping well, not eating properly, possibly using substances to numb feelings. They're anxious, possibly depressed, struggling with focus and functioning. Their health is declining because they don't know how to handle the emotional impact of losing you. And the unprocessed feelings are manifesting as physical and psychological symptoms. The health decline is hitting them hard because it's creating suffering in multiple domains simultaneously. The decline manifests as the avoidant not taking care of themselves the way they usually do. They're letting routine slip, neglecting self-care, not maintaining standards they usually maintain. The depression and anxiety make everything harder, sapping motivation and energy. Work performance suffers. Social life suffers. Everything becomes more difficult when they're carrying unprocessed grief and attachment distress they don't know how to resolve. The health consequences also reveal to the avoidant that feelings can't be indefinitely suppressed without cost. The emotions they're trying to avoid are creating physical symptoms, psychological distress, functional impairment. The body and mind are reveling against the suppression strategy, forcing the avoidant to recognize that their coping mechanisms aren't working and are actually making things worse. The avoidant is learning that detachment has health costs they didn't account for. The decline is hitting hard because it's creating downward spiral where health problems make emotional problems worse, and emotional problems make health problems worse. The avoidant is trapped in deteriorating situation without knowing how to stop the decline. They need help, but don't know how to ask for it. They need to process feelings, but don't know how. They're stuck watching themselves get worse while feeling powerless to reverse the trajectory. The deactivation strategy failure. The avoidant is trying all their usual deactivation strategies and discovering none of them are working with you. They focus on your flaws, but the flaws don't make them care less. They remind themselves why the relationship ended, but it doesn't make them stop wanting you back. They try to convince themselves they're better off, but they don't feel better off. They attempt to create distance psychologically, but the distance creates more pain rather than relief. All the strategies that help them detach from others are failing to help them detach from you, and the failure is hitting them hard. The failure manifests as the avoidant exhausting their defensive playbook without getting relief. They've tried everything they know how to try, and nothing is working. They can't make themselves stop caring. They can't make the attachment go away. They can't convince themselves they don't need you. Each failed strategy increases their desperation and sense of powerlessness. The avoidant is discovering they're not in control of their feelings the way they thought they were. The deactivation failure also proves that you are different, that the connection was different, that what existed between you was deeper than what the avoidant has experienced with others. If the strategies worked on everyone else but not on you, it means you mattered more. The attachment was stronger. The bond was deeper. The avoidant is confronting that they were more connected to you than they've been to anyone, and that connection is why they can't detach now. The failure is hitting hard because it removes the avoidant's primary coping mechanism right when they need it most. They're in pain, and their usual way of managing pain isn't working. They're stuck with feelings they can't suppress, attachment they can't deactivate, need they can't eliminate. The avoidant is forced to sit with discomfort they've spent their life avoiding, and they don't have tools to tolerate it. The failure of their defensive system is creating crisis because they have nothing else to fall back on. The comparison to previous relationships. The avoidant is comparing losing you to previous relationship endings and recognizing this one is hitting completely differently. Previous breakups were easy. They moved on quickly, felt relieved, didn't look back. But losing you is devastating in ways previous losses weren't. The comparison is forcing the avoidant to recognize that you were different, that what they had with you was different, that they cared about you differently than they've cared about previous partners. The recognition is hitting them hard because it proves they were more attached than they admitted. The comparison manifests as the avoidant being shocked by how much harder this breakup is. They expected to bounce back the way they always have, but they're not bouncing back. They expected to feel relief and freedom, but they feel loss and emptiness. They expected their detachment to work, but it's failing. The difference between this ending and previous endings is so stark that it forces recognition that the relationship wasn't like previous relationships. The recognition also creates regret about how they handled things. If they'd known this relationship was different, they might have tried harder, been more present, worked on their issues, but they treated it like all their other relationships, assuming it would end like the others ended, not recognizing its uniqueness until it was too late. The avoidant is suffering from not recognizing what they had until they lost it, from treating something special as if it were ordinary. The comparison is hitting hard because it highlights what the avoidant lost specifically. They didn't just lose a relationship. They lost the best relationship they've had, the deepest connection they've experienced, the person who mattered most. The loss is greater than any previous loss, and the pain is proportional to what was lost. The avoidant is experiencing grief commensurate with the value of what they're grieving, and the intensity is teaching them exactly how much you meant, even when they were pretending you didn't mean that much. The permanent consequences acceptance. The avoidant is beginning to accept that losing you might have permanent consequences they can't undo or fix. The relationship is over and might not be recoverable. You've moved on and might not come back. The damage is done and might not be repayable. The avoidant is confronting that some losses are permanent, that some endings don't have second chances, that their detachment might have cost them something they can never get back. The acceptance of permanent consequences is hitting them hard because it means living with regret and loss forever. The acceptance emerges as the avoidant stops hoping for reconnection and starts grieving the finality. They see that you're genuinely done, that you're building life without them, that you're not leaving doors open for their return. The permanence of your departure is undeniable, and accepting it means accepting that the best thing they had is gone forever because of their choices. The avoidant is confronting that they destroyed something irreplaceable and have to live with that destruction. The consequences also include recognizing how the loss of you will affect their whole life going forward. They lost not just relationship but future they could have had with you, experiences they would have shared, growth they would have supported in each other. All of that potential is foreclosed permanently. The avoidant is grieving not just what was but what could have been and now won't be because of how they handled things. The acceptance is hitting hard because it offers no comfort or resolution. The avoidant has to sit with permanent loss, with unfixable mistake, with consequences they can never escape. They have to build future carrying this loss, knowing they caused it, unable to repair it. The permanence means the pain doesn't have endpoint or resolution. The avoidant is learning to live with grief that will never fully resolve because what they lost can never be recovered. The social comparison devastation. The avoidant is comparing themselves to the person you're with now or the life you're building, and the comparison is devastating. They see you happy with someone who can provide what they couldn't provide, be what they couldn't be. The comparison forces recognition that someone else is succeeding where they failed, and watching that success is hitting the avoidant hard with inadequacy and regret. The devastation emerges from seeing you receive the love and partnership you deserved, but they couldn't give. The new person is emotionally available, consistently present, willing to commit. They're doing all the things the avoidant knew they should do, but couldn't make themselves do. The avoidant is confronted with evidence that the problem wasn't you being too demanding. The problem was their avoidance, and someone without that limitation is thriving with you. The comparison also reveals what the relationship could have been if the avoidant had been capable of showing up differently. They see you happy and recognize that could have been them. The avoidant is mourning not just losing you, but losing the version of the relationship that was possible if they'd been healthier. Every milestone you reach with new partner is milestone they could have reached with you if they'd been different. The self-awareness without tools, crisis. The avoidant has developed painful self-awareness about their patterns and how those patterns destroyed the relationship. They see clearly now how they pushed you away, how their defenses prevented intimacy, how their fear sabotaged connection. But this self-awareness hasn't translated into ability to change. They understand their dysfunction, but don't know how to fix it. The crisis of awareness without tools is hitting them hard because understanding makes the loss more painful without providing path to preventing future losses. The crisis emerges through the avoidant recognizing their patterns in excruciating detail. They replay moments where they chose defense over connection, where they prioritized protection over relationship, where they let fear drive behavior that pushed you away. Each recognition is painful because they see exactly what they did wrong, exactly how they could have been different, exactly where they failed. But seeing doesn't equal capacity to change. The avoidant is stuck knowing what's wrong without knowing how to fix it. The awareness also creates shame spiral where the avoidant judges themselves harshly for patterns they can see but can't control. They know their behavior was dysfunctional. They recognize they hurt you unnecessarily. They understand they destroyed good thing through their limitations. This knowledge creates shame that further reinforces the defensive patterns, creating cycle where awareness leads to shame leads to more avoidance. The avoidant is trapped in pattern they can see clearly but can't escape. The crisis is hitting hard because self-awareness without change feels like curse rather than blessing. The avoidant would almost rather not see their patterns because seeing them without being able to change creates helplessness and despair. They're watching themselves repeat behaviors they know are destructive, unable to stop despite understanding. The awareness makes future losses feel inevitable, which creates hopelessness about ever having successful relationship. The meaning loss recognition. The avoidant is recognizing that you provided meaning to their life that they didn't acknowledge while you were present. You gave their day structure and purpose. You made experiences meaningful through sharing them. You provided reason to care about things beyond themselves. Without you, the avoidant's life feels purposeless and empty in ways they didn't anticipate. The recognition that you were source of meaning they took for granted is hitting them hard. The recognition emerges through the avoidant struggle to find motivation or purpose post-separation. Activities they used to enjoy feel hollow. Achievements feel meaningless without you to share them with. Days blend together without the structure your presence created. The avoidant is discovering that they were living for more than just themselves when you were there. And now that you're gone, they don't know what they're living for. The meaning loss also reveals that the avoidant's claimed independence was actually interdependence they didn't acknowledge. They thought they were self-sufficient, generating their own meaning and purpose, but you were integral to their sense of meaning in ways they never recognized. Your care gave their well-being importance. Your interest gave their activities significance. Your presence gave their life narrative that felt meaningful. The avoidant was dependent on you for existential grounding they believed came from within. The recognition is hitting hard because the avoidant can't easily replace the meaning you provided. Other relationships don't generate the same sense of purpose. New activities don't create the same feeling of significance. The avoidant is confronting existential emptiness that comes from losing the person who made life feel meaningful. They're learning that meaning in life is largely relational, and losing you meant losing access to the kind of meaning that makes life feel worth living.